My fellow Americans, welcome to The Celluloid President, the podcast about American presidents on film. Today we're discussing Hyde Park on Hudson, the 2012 look back at Franklin Roosevelt's very close relationship with his distant cousin, Daisy Suckley.
I, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, do solemnly swear that I will faithfully execute the office of President of the United States and will, to the best of my ability, preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution of the United States. So help me God.
I'm Gary Holmes, and joining me today via Zoom from his childhood hometown of Glens Falls on Hudson is Jim Robinson, who eats hot dogs the way God intended, with mustard. Jim, I've been to picnics where people put ketchup on their hot dogs. Can you even imagine?
No, that's ridiculous. I had my first hot dog in years, just 2 days ago. I went to a barbecue
Yeah.
with some old friends down in Florida, and the horror of it, they served hot dogs. I had to eat a hot dog, but I only put mustard on it. In younger years, I would put onions too, but I'm not allowed to eat onions anymore.
All right. Well, I thought you were going to tell me that you were so inspired by this movie that you went out and sought out a hot dog.
No, but I thought of the movie when the hot dogs came out, not on a silver serving tray though,
Yeah.
but on
Okay.
paper plates.
I think the hot dog depicted in this movie is the most famous hot dog in American history, and I'm not even kidding.
Well, you know what it reminded me of? The word rosebud and Citizen Kane.
Right.
In this movie, the words hot dog have the same resonance and important meaning to this movie as Rosebud and Citizen Kane.
Okay. Well, listen, Franklin Roosevelt is considered to be our third greatest president after Washington and Lincoln. But there's been so many books devoted to the women in his life, including his mother, his wife, his executive assistant, his mistresses, whom I've never been able to keep straight, and now his cousin and best friend, Daisy Suckley. Considering how important he is in the history of America and the creation of the modern welfare state, are we being shallow to focus on his personal life so much?
Yeah, I think we are, but on the other hand, there's so much to say and write and film about Franklin Roosevelt that it's almost a why not? Let's cover this chapter too. You say he's the third greatest president. You mean after Richard Nixon and Eisenhower? No, just kidding.
Yeah.
He was a great president. April. You say April 12th, 1945, to previous generations of Americans, and it has every bit as much meaning to them as November 22nd, 1963, or September 11th, 2001. The first date being the day that Roosevelt died. He was just a mammoth, huge figure in the life of the country.
Well, I can't imagine what a shock it must have been. He'd been president for such a long time, they can't even imagine anyone else being president.
Yeah, so you and I are sort of, let's face it, we lean conservative. What do you think of FDR as a president from that vantage point?
I guess the most important, first of all, I will give him credit for two things that were drummed into our heads when we took, I don't know, I can't remember whether you took that recent American history class with me with Mr. Jacobs in college, but
No.
He made the point that FDR basically saved American democracy and saved the capitalist system, which was in the toilet when he came in, just through the sheer magnetism of his personality and although a lot of the things he did during the New Deal were kind of not very productive and maybe counterproductive, and so he saved capitalism, which I don't know if Hoover was really going to be able to do that because he was such a dour figure. So the sheer leadership ability was important. And of course, winning the war. I don't know whether anyone else would have been able to pull that off to the extent that he did, harnessing the American capitalist system to produce all those weapons and men. So I'll give him credit for that. I'm obviously not much of a fan of a lot of the regulation that he came in with and the welfare state in general. But I have to admit that he was very consequential, and at a pivotal time.
Well, I finally figured out that I had to develop sort of a bifurcated view of him, the policy side and the leadership side.
Right.
And on the leadership side, I think there's no question that he, really steered the country through two of its greatest crises. It doesn't mean that the decisions behind those, everything he did, was good. There's even a lot of questions about was he really a good wartime, tactician. But the other thing I have to admit, as I've gotten older and I've gotten a little further away from my libertarian purism and saying government shouldn't do this, that, or the other. But I had to ask myself, and maybe, you ask yourself, just exactly which FDR programs would you get rid of today? Social Security? The Securities and Exchange Commission? I mean, we shouldn't have one. And so forth. I mean, unemployment insurance, there shouldn't be any unemployment insurance. So, I mean, now that we've lived with a lot of the programs, the ones that didn't get tossed out by courts and didn't, found to be totally worthless, from the conservative perspective, I think they've got to sort of put up or shut up.
Well, I do agree that Social Security probably is a good thing because it has so many people do depend on it, and it did raise a lot of poor people, a lot of poverty. So I'm okay with Social Security, and I'm okay with government programs that set rules that that we operate under, so to make capitalism work better. So I think that's
Yeah.
fair. I don't really agree with let the market, let buyer beware, and all that kind of thing. But so yeah, no, I'm okay with many of these programs. But you talked about a lot of the programs that were found to be either unconstitutional or wasteful, and a lot of them really, like transportation, transportation stuff, and there were a lot of union rules that were put in place that I find very productive. So I'm with you. I mean, I think he was overall a great president. Some of the things we probably could have done without, but I don't know. Certainly, the difference between when he became president and when he ended being president, America was two different countries then, and it was probably a much better country.
Yeah, of course, you could argue that it was the height of irresponsibility for him to run for that fourth term, which he lived less than 2 months into.
I know. It really is unbelievable. I mean,
yeah.
All right.
Speaking of presidents who shouldn't run again.
Well, no, yeah, presidents.
I can think of two.
Okay, so this movie is ostensibly about FDR, but as we've discussed, the real hero is that hot dog. So can you tell us what the movie is about? Just do a little summary for people who haven't seen it, and just tell them why I'm right about this hot dog thing.
Sure. The movie opens with Daisy Suckley, who's a fifth or sixth cousin of FDR, receiving a phone call from Anna Roosevelt, FDR's mother, and saying, could you please come over and keep him company and hang out, whatever terms they used in those days. FDR, she was at her rather decrepit place in the Hudson and Rhinebeck, and FDR was nearby at the family estate. She hadn't seen him in years. Their first meeting was very awkward, but the relationship developed. They bonded. They found things to talk about. She became a companion, a confidant. And along the way, she grew in confidence and style. She started wearing fancier clothes. She was smoking all the time, acting more sophisticated. And their favorite activity was to go on drives through the countryside in FDR's hand-controlled car. And one day they stop in a field of flowers on a hilltop, and let's just say that a very utilitarian sexual encounter took place, and which changed and deepened the relationship. Meanwhile, the other women in FDR's life, Anna and Eleanor and Missy LeHand, would make their entrances and exits in various scenes of the movie. And then the movie shifts to the impending visit of King George VI and his consort Elizabeth. They're on their way to Hyde Park. And so we sort of see a shift from romance and affairs to the culture clash between Brits and Americans, and especially between Eleanor Roosevelt and Elizabeth. Now, the King's job is to convince FDR to support the UK, which is facing an existential threat from the Nazis, and to win over the American people. So, in the course of the activities in Hyde Park with the King and Queen, a state dinner, a swim, a picnic, etc., we see a lot of drama, a lot of humor, and it's all played out sometimes to dramatic effect, sometimes to comedic effect. And interestingly, Daisy is not in all these activities. She's sort of left on the outside. She's the other woman, one of the other women. And she feels lonely, so she goes up to Top Cottage, where, which is her special place with FDR. They agreed it was their special place. And lo and behold, she finds out that Missy LeHand and FDR are up there having a little sexual encounter of their own. So she's heartbroken and she's shocked. And meanwhile, the next day, the famous picnic occurs with the King and Queen and a bunch of the locals with FDR and Eleanor. And the King is famously photographed biting into a good old-fashioned American hot dog. And that's sort of the climax of that particular story. Missy continues as Missy and Daisy continue as confidants under the new wisdom that they're never going to be the only one for FDR. And the movie sort of ends in a rather rushed fashion, a voiceover narration by Daisy, quickly recaps the final years of his life, and he is seen driving off in a car with a famous pose with a cigarette holder sticking out of his mouth for the last time, and the movie ends, and there you have it.
Well, this movie was not a major hit, which is kind of surprising because I think it was better than the reception. It was released in 2012, but in the theaters mostly in 2013, and had a box office of $11 million, which that was 10 years ago. The inflation hasn't gone up that much. So $11 million is not that much. The top box office movie in 2013 was Iron Man 3 with $409 million. Other top movies were The Hunger Games, Man of Steel, Despicable Me, and Monsters University. This was the 171st most popular movie that year.
Well, that's pretty good.
Yeah, 171. It wasn't as bad as the 175th. Again, I'm surprised at how unsuccessful it was. But I think it might have had something to do with coming at a time when movies were transitioning to superhero, cartoon, and franchise movies, which are indicated by those top 5 movies. I mean, Man of Steel is a Superman movie. Hunger Games is a book. Monsters University and Despicable Me are cartoons. So we're transitioning away from the time when these grown-up movies with adult themes were beginning to lose their appeal in the theater.
Well, speaking of grown-ups, why do you think the movie was rated R? I mean, the really only one scene was not graphic. It was treated sort of almost indirectly. I didn't notice a lot of profanity. Why do you think this was an R-rated movie? That might have hurt it.
It might have, I think the sex scene was not graphic, but it was, graphic in your imagination. Also, there's a lot of smoking in the movie, and I don't know if you saw the, R-rated, which includes sex,
alcohol, smoking.
So alcohol and smoking, yeah. I don't know. You're right. I think they probably would have been better off, artistically, historically, and everything else, leaving that scene out and getting a PG-13 rating.
Yeah.
Well, what did you think of the movie? Did it meet, beat, or fail your expectations? Any surprises?
Um, I enjoyed the movie. Just I never even heard of it, frankly, until we started discussing presidential movies. And my initial reaction before watching was I couldn't imagine Bill Murray, given his other credits, coming in and plausibly playing FDR. Um, I enjoyed the culture clash between the British and the Americans, and I appreciated the relationship between the king and queen more than I enjoyed the relationship between FDR and Daisy, and more than I enjoyed, all the, toing and froing about their relationship. So I
Yeah.
really saw it as two separate movies. I thought I was more interested once the king and queen came on the scene.
Yeah, I agree with you. I actually agree with you completely. I enjoyed it too. I liked the beginning of it when they're becoming friends. I liked the king and queen thing visit quite a bit. I did not like the romantic part of it at all. But I was glad to have watched it because I never heard of Daisy before this, and it got me interested in learning more about her, um, and I actually saw this back in 2012, so when
Hmm.
it first came out. So and I thought it was fun. I enjoyed it enough to recommend that we do it again. But
What was so interesting to me about some of the cultural issues is, as you know, FDR was supposed to be our patrician politician.
right.
That was part of the appeal if you liked him, and his, criticism if you didn't like him, that he was, wealthy and from a sort of an upper crust family, and on the Hudson River, estates on the Hudson River. And yet once you introduce the British, suddenly the Roosevelts become very, very tacky and Yankee crass. We see what patrician behavior is really like. I enjoyed that. I enjoyed that about the movie.
Yeah, no, that's actually quite a good point. Our highest class is like fourth rate down when you compare it to the British.
Good
Um,
for us. Good
Good
for
for
us.
us. Yeah. Well, I mean, who had the upper hand in the relationship, though? I mean,
Right.
in a way, I don't know why we were so worried about impressing the king and queen of England. I mean, they're coming to us hat in hand, looking for help to get them, support them during the war. So we were much stronger nation by then, and so it is an interesting thing how class people get really nervous about class, and as opposed to money or power or anything else.
Yeah, even if you don't particularly like royalty
You're
or the
right.
idea of royalty, and you don't like classism, they're still somehow, when they come into your presence, even normal people can act kind of silly. I met the Queen of England once and shook her hand.
Okay.
Um, this would be the daughter of the
Right.
couple
Right.
that appeared in this movie, because I was working in the governor's office in California, and she and Philip did a visit to California, and they walked around the whole set of offices in our office complex, and we all were told to stand in the doorway and then wait till she offers her hand, and then you sort of gently receive her hand. So and people were just absolutely thrilled and nervous, and so there is a reaction to that, to the royalty, even if we're proud of ourselves as egalitarian Americans.
Well, I'll also admit that I've watched all the royal weddings with my wife. But I get up at 5 o'clock in the morning like she does and watch them, and I will almost certainly watch the coronation of King Charles. So I don't know what it is.
You
With
know
the
what I didn't, what as I was watching the movie and with my expectations, another something that I fell short was I thought more of the current history of the times would be invoked.
Right.
It was really pretty shallow on the history. And there was some cheating using her narrative voice. Sometimes she would just have a few throwaway lines like, oh, he had the weight of the world on his shoulders. Okay. And what then? And it didn't come. It was really almost like a stage drama comedy, or what do you call that? Dramedy.
Dramedy, yeah. Well, I think they assume that you know the history, and you know that the war is about to break out, and but I don't know. I mean, that's I think that's part of the problem with the movie is that they don't really put things into context that well. I like the overall feel of the movie and the nostalgia for the 1930s.
Yeah.
Being evoked through the clothes and the home decor and
The bathing suits.
the bathing suits, yeah, the car. I like the way FDR was depicted. Oliver Wendell Holmes, who is unfortunately no relation of me, described him as a second-class intellect, but a first-class temperament. And that comes through in the movie about how he manipulates everyone through the force of his personality. I mean, even though he's not as classy as the king, I mean, he's manipulating that king like he's playing him like a violin. And he's kind of manipulating everyone else too. So I like the way he was depicted.
Mm-hmm.
And I was very taken with the relationship between FDR and the king. They
Yeah.
made it into a little bit of a father son dynamic. I don't know this for sure, but I am almost positive that was fictionalized. In the movie, King George is really nervous and unconfident, and FDR takes a paternalistic interest in him. And even though it's not probably historically accurate, everyone has, most men think about their own relationships with their father and would certainly like a pat in the head from someone who is a father figure. So
yeah, I thought of that, and then I checked the ages.
Yeah,
and
me too.
FDR was still in his late 50s, and I think the king was 40 or something like
43.
that. So it's not exactly
14-year difference. I mean, come on. And
he'd already been king. Do that all the time, don't they?
Yeah, they do. Yeah. And I mean, he'd already been king for 3 years. It's not like he had just sort of stepped into the job.
Right.
One thing I have to say, I did not at all like the implied sexual and romantic relationship between Daisy and FDR. And it's not historically proven one way or another whether they were cousins or kissing cousins. We both have read this book by Gary Ginsberg called First Friends, which I would recommend to anyone who's interested in politics, which is about the presidents and their best friends. And in for the FDR chapter, Gary claims that Daisy was FDR's best friend. And he makes the argument that it was a platonic relationship. And I find that compelling,
Well, I think the way he put it, if I'm remembering it right, or maybe it's something else I read, is that something happened at a particular moment in time.
Right.
But nobody really knows what it is.
Right.
It might have just been a kiss or something like that. The movie makes it, that it was something more serious than that. I have to say, I think the reason why historians like that and other historians have trouble concluding that a particular woman in FDR's life was sexual relationship is because they aren't being imaginative enough about what a person in a wheelchair can still do. And human beings will find a way to be sexual no matter what, assuming the operation of some things. And I think a lot of times you see a lot of commentary from past historians saying, well, how could they have? Well, yes, they can.
Right.
I think that inhibits people, some of the people who are trying to draw conclusions based on all the evidence. That prohibits some people from going to the side of, yeah, there was something sexual.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I know that people in wheelchairs can have sex, and but I find that even if they did have a sexual relationship, which I don't think so, the way it depicted is very, histrionic. When Daisy discovers that, he's also having an affair with, supposedly, which again, I don't think that's happened with Missy LeHand. It happens right in the middle of the royal visit, and she has a heart attack. She's like running down the hill and falling down and crying, and she's acting like a jealous lover, like, how dare this married man cheat on his wife with someone other than me. Um,
Yeah.
and I I didn't like the way that Daisy and Missy ended up, like in the movie, they ended up like sister wives, like in a man sharing relationship.
Right. They bonded over both being cheated upon.
Yeah,
And they were
exactly.
cheating upon a wife,
Yeah, exactly.
supposedly.
you know, um,
But the other thing I think that I think you could be right, because another thing that I sometimes is overlooked, and I don't know what the situation is today, I can't characterize it, but there was sort of a legacy in earlier times in our history of what we'd call old maids.
yeah,
Women who just never married and never, joined together with a man. I mean, my grandmother had two sisters, and neither of them ever married. And that you've if you read back through history and all that, you see that a lot. And this could have just been one of some of those situations.
yeah. And the other thing about this particular sexual, I mean, right. So we assume that she's an old maid, and this particular sexual situation is just a weird thing for a 40-year-old woman to all of a sudden do for the first time in her. I mean, again, I don't know if it's the first time in her life or not, but it's just a weird thing. I mean, it's like they're friends with benefits, but it's like he's the only one that getting the benefit. I mean,
Right.
it reminded me of, I don't know if when you were in high school, but when I was in high school, couples would go off in cars, and it was called parking.
Yeah.
And you go off in the, we actually had an actual park so you would park your car in the park. And so it was double parking. And they'd be making out, and God knows what was going on in there. That was usually kind of a reciprocal thing. It wasn't just a one-way thing like happens in this movie. There'd be kissing and,
Right.
fondling around and mutual fondling. And this is just like a one-way sex act and this is not my idea of a love relationship.
Right. Well, don't overlook the power of power, though. Remember Henry Kissinger, power is the ultimate aphrodisiac.
Right.
And a lot of people chase after, are needily seek the affections of a very powerful person, and get jealous when someone else tries to horn in on that. So, I mean,
Right.
all those dynamics are plausible. I
Yeah.
think it's plausible there was something a little more, but not to warrant the idea that she should feel so jilted.
And the other thing too is you mentioned people having the lacking of imagination and what a handicapped person can do, but I also think they're lacking imagination in what a platonic relationship can be like.
That's right. I agree with that.
I mean, everyone always automatically assumes that men and women, if they're friends, there must be some sort of sex thing there. But
Right.
historically speaking, Daisy and FDR were friends from 1922 to 1945 when he died. It was a 23-year-old relationship, and that's a long time to sustain a sexual relationship
that can never lead to marriage.
that can never lead to marriage.
Yeah.
And I mean, I think it's much more plausible that they were friends, literal friends who enjoyed each other's companionship, and that he was able to talk to her in a way that he couldn't talk to anybody else.
Yeah, I think it's, especially when you're dealing with someone like Roosevelt and the problems he faced, and the force of his personality, you stir that all together in a pot, and it's very plausible to have strong-minded women who would say what they want, but who aren't going to go out and tell the press. And some, one woman might deal in policy like Eleanor did, and another woman might deal just in frivolous things to deliberately help the man relax.
Right. Right.
And they could both be just as valuable to FDR.
So, we usually try and figure out what this movie is trying to accomplish. And what do you think it's trying to accomplish?
I think it was trying to show a sort of a less known side of FDR. And the screenwriter was really, I think, the driving force behind this movie more than than the director. What was his name? Richard Nelson.
Okay.
It was a big deal on Broadway. He wrote the whole script for the show Chess, multiple Tony winner and all that,
Okay.
and who lived along the Hudson. And he was just fascinated, and he likes newsworthy events. He likes to seize upon, sort of like Oliver Stone, like to seize upon current events or newsworthy events, and got fascinated by the discovery of Daisy's diaries and letters under her bed when she died at almost 100, the age of 100. She just barely missed, sort of like Betty White, just barely missed 100. And these documents were all discovered, and that's when the relationship in our 90s really became known. So I think it was sort of almost a breaking news purpose. We've got this new historical chapter. God, we got to do a script about it. We got to do a movie about it.
Well, let's talk about let me just tell what I think it's about. I agree with you with that. Also, I think he's really trying to show FDR's unique leadership style, but also how important geopolitical events can sometimes turn on personal relationships and mundane things.
Right.
I mean, I've talked about this hot dog maybe a little bit too much, but that was an important event because it humanized the Brits, and that whole trip was important because before then, the British were not anywhere near as popular as they are now. I mean, as I say in the movies, the Germans didn't like them, the Jews didn't like them, the Irish in particular hated them. And we did not have a particularly close strategic relationship with the British then. And there was a big isolationism problem in the United States, and there was no support to support the British in another war. But somehow this trip, culminating with that stupid hot dog, actually changed people's opinions about the British, and they felt like they were actually cousins of ours, and so
if it really did, I mean,
yeah, who knows? All right, let's discuss the actors. What do you think about Bill Murray as FDR?
I struggled to appreciate him. I thought in some of the scenes, when he was dealing with the king one-on-one, I thought he was really good. But ultimately, I got to do a thumbs down on it.
Okay.
I just, nothing really bad. It's just, I found it hard to believe. He fumbled around for the right accent. I think his voice and cadence kept sort of changing during the movie, like he was trying to find it, the right way of talking. I thought he played it a little too curmudgeonly. I know FDR had personality quirks and he had a special way of dealing with people, but FDR was a much more if you look at all this footage and pictures of FDR, and granted, this is the publicly presented stuff, he's much more statesmanlike and solid looking a figure than this sort of wispy, curmudgeonly jokester or frivolous kind of talker. So he didn't sell me.
Okay.
Line.
Bill Murray is famous for being a comedian, and
right.
He was not trying to be funny in this movie. He's playing it straight. And he didn't really work. It didn't really work that much for me either. He didn't look like him, and he didn't sound like him. The one thing I would give him credit for, and maybe this is the writing more than the acting, I guess what he did exemplify is FDR's, joie de vivre, his charm, his confidence. and all of that. And you know, as I said, Bill Murray's a deadpan, sarcastic comic actor, and he's done other serious roles like Lost in Transition and What About Bob? And there is an underlying sadness to his humor that and acting that comes through in this depiction of FDR, who is fundamentally a lonely person, but still, I agree with you. It's not really, he doesn't have the weight to pull it off.
I do think that in some of the scenes, I had the same reaction that I had with Lincoln in Daniel Day-Lewis in Lincoln, and that is on the profile shots and a little more distant shots, he was more believable to me. But some of the close-up front shots, front facial shots, I lost my sense of belief in it. They put the great marks on Bill Murray's face, the blemishes that FDR had, but he had much better teeth than FDR. Really bad teeth. But that's Hollywood.
That is going to be that is going to be a real historical problem going forward for any movie we ever see, because the teeth are so much better. I've just been watching this series about Jesus called The Chosen, and every single one of those actors has perfect, beautiful teeth. They can do everything else with their faces. They can make them look gaunt or whatever, long hair, grubby, dirty, and they've got these gorgeous teeth.
I know.
All right, Laura Linney rather plays Daisy. I have no idea what Daisy looked like, sounded like, or anything like, acted like. But I kind of think that she's believable as a 1930s spinster, although she's quite beautiful. The jealous a lover part doesn't work for me though. What did you think?
I didn't appreciate her that much. I haven't seen her in other things. I'm sure you'll tell us what she was in and other good things she did. But again, because I wasn't that crazy about that half of the movie, namely the FDR Daisy relationship, it made it hard for me to appreciate the acting. I thought she, especially at the beginning, was probably meant to be. She played it really awkward and sheepish and flaccid, really, and she just didn't make a strong impression on me.
She's actually quite a well-known actress among a certain set, right? She's kind of, I would say that she's like a queen of PBS. Not that she's been in a lot of PBS stuff, but that she appeals to that kind of audience, upscale viewers that watch on PBS, and she did introduce Downton Abbey for a while. So I mean, she's in a wide range of parts. She was in so she's in my least favorite movie, Love Actually, and then she's also most recently plays as the money launderess in Ozark, which is completely not an upscale show. So my biggest problem with her though is Daisy's supposed to be smart, intuitive, little wry, someone that he can confide to, and none of that comes through. I mean, it doesn't really, I don't understand from watching this movie why FDR was so drawn to her and what he found to like in her.
Yeah, they didn't show interactions on a serious level. Like, what do you think about Churchill? What do you think? I mean,
right.
Which they talked about that kind of stuff.
Right.
And
yeah.
That's where I think what I called the narrator cheating came in. Yeah. So they would bring her, she would voice over some sections of the movie where they would throw in some of the serious stuff, the people being unemployed and the depression and all that. They never actually showed them talking about that stuff. And that was a disappointment. And what you're left with in this character is sort of a simpering, simpering, needy person.
Well, they go out of their way to show her being simpering, because you remember when Eleanor and Missy LeHand are kind of bullying her. What do you think about this, Daisy? And she doesn't have anything to say.
Yeah.
All right. Speaking of Eleanor, So Eleanor Roosevelt, most famous and controversial lady of all time, she's played by Olivia Williams,
Yeah.
who's a British actress. I thought hers was the best impersonation in the movie. Eleanor is usually presented as a dowdy, humorless, woke prude. Here, she's a younger, more vibrant woke prude. Um, um, I just don't. Again, I can live with FDR as a historical figure. I do not like Eleanor Roosevelt as a person or anything to do with Eleanor. I mean, she's like yuck. And they show it in the movie where we're it's one thing to not to say and to acknowledge that we're not British subjects. It's another thing to ask the Queen if you can call her Elizabeth after
Right.
you've been told not to.
Yeah,
Um,
I liked that character. I thought she did a great job acting wise. The imitation was good, except she didn't have Eleanor's buck teeth. And, and yeah, Eleanor, I know people have sentimental feelings for her, but I go with our one of our favorites, William F. Buckley Jr., who once commented, he said, I see that Eleanor Roosevelt, this is when she was still alive, they were both still alive. I see when Eleanor Roosevelt says she will never, ever cross a picket line. So what I propose is that we establish a 24-hour picket line around Hyde Park. So
yeah,
there's
no, yeah. One thing that does come through is like she was slightly awkward and an idealist, and so that is true. And I apparently it is true that as in the movie, she recruited a Native American Indian to sing an Indian chant at the picnic, and it was like kind of that's the kind of thing that even today you can imagine like modern day Eleanor Roosevelt's, imposing something so boring but politically correct on a visit from the British
Well,
royalty.
what I could really understand after watching this movie and thinking about more current times is I can really understand how Hillary Clinton has chosen Eleanor Roosevelt as a role
Oh
model
yeah.
in more ways than one in terms of
Well, Eleanor
relationships.
Roosevelt was Hillary Clinton on steroids.
Yes, didn't
Um,
she? Didn't the actress play Camilla in The
yeah,
Crown?
yeah.
I
I
mean,
mean,
she's got
I did not, I've watched The Crown. I've seen her play that part, and I didn't recognize her in the movie until I went and looked at her IMDb page. And so that kind of shows you what a good actress she is, that she can inhabit
right.
roles.
Yeah.
King George, King George the Fifth, Sixth rather, has been played by many actors. Colin Firth in The King's Speech, Jared Harris in The Crown, Ben Mendelsohn in The Darkest Hour, and now Samuel West. I don't think this is the best impersonation of the king. I think it's better than Colin Firth, but not as good as Bill Mendelsohn in Darkest Hour.
Yeah, I by the way, I did watch, I hadn't seen The King's Speech before. And I watched it knowing we were going to talk about a King George the Sixth character. And I have to tell you, I didn't care for the King's Speech that much. I thought it was histrionic. It was like, I'm going to go earn an Oscar for this
Right,
performance acting.
which he did.
Now, I know, with one exception, the ending scene where he's actually giving the speech, and they show different vignettes of different people listening from all walks of life listening to the speech. I thought that was good. I was getting choked up, but God, you had to sit through a lot of boredom to get there.
No, I'm with you. The King's Speech is one of the many movies that have driven me crazy over the years for being
Everyone praises it all the
Oscar
time.
winners when it's kind of just extremely mediocre and and kind of boring. Yeah.
But I thought Samuel West was good. I think he's a Shakespearean stage actor mainly, from the UK. I thought he was pretty good. I mean,
Yeah, he was fine. I mean, as an actor, it was fine. I don't believe that he was as insecure and deferential to FDR as you see in this thing. But I thought I thought he was fine.
yeah,
Now, Queen Elizabeth,
my
she's known
favorite. my favorite performance.
Yeah, well, she's known to us as the gin swilling jolly Queen Mother, and played by Olivia Colman, who also played her, this queen's daughter in The Crown.
Right.
She's 2 seasons as Queen Elizabeth II.
She's an Oscar winner.
Yeah, she for playing another queen. So she's
Right.
played 3 queens, which is a
Yeah.
good poker hand. She's queen. She played Queen Anne in the Favorite. So and she's actually a fantastic actress with a huge
Yes.
range.
I thought she was excellent, and just to me, the good acting I appreciate is not just how they deliver their lines, but their reaction shots.
Right.
And she just had great reaction shots. So, but I thought she was real. I thought she did well, and I thought the chemistry between her and Samuel West was really good.
Yeah, it's believable. Although she's a bit at odds with what we think of as the Queen Mother. It's hard to believe that this kind of brittle, stuck up woman would then become the fun Queen Mother that we're, and it's also, I find it really hard to believe that she would have compared her husband twice to his brother. I mean,
that's the other historical disconnect, is that, having just watched The King's Speech, their relationship is much different in that movie than this one.
Yeah,
she is the totally supportive, sympathetic wife in The King's Speech.
Yeah, no spouse who should ever compare her husband or sister or anyone else to a sibling. I mean, it's gross. Why would you do that? Especially when you think of King Edward, the one who abdicated the throne. It was the brother who quit being king, and then King George was thrust into the role. I get it that he wasn't prepared for it, wasn't planning for it. And so I understand that he would have been, a little apprehensive about it, but for her to say, well, your brother never would have done this. Well, who knows what that brother would have ever done?
Now, can I mention one more actor?
Okay.
Eleanor Bron, the aunt of Daisy.
Okay.
If there's a Beatles connection, you and I have to play it for all it's worth, right?
Okay.
But Eleanor Bron was the attractive young woman that both Paul and George were flirting with and chasing after in the movie Help.
Okay.
And she was very attractive. Some of the Beatles historical gossip suggests that at least one of the Beatles actually did have a fling with her. And I can't remember which one at the time, but who cares? But the other thing is that some of the Beatles history says Eleanor Bron is where Paul McCartney came up with the title Eleanor Rigby.
All right, so a very famous, important person in Beatle history. I did not know that, so congratulations for digging that up.
You can never overlook a Beatles connection.
No, you can sniff those out.
Right.
All right, let's turn to the history. A lot of this is historically accurate. I mean, Daisy really did exist. She was a remote cousin who was close friends with FDR. The king and queen did visit. They did eat those hot dogs. This was the first visit by a British monarch to the U.S. It did bring the U.S. and Britain closer together, I believe. Maybe you don't. The geopolitical stakes are real. A lot of the minor details are real. The servants really did drop 2 trays during dinner and during the dinner with the king. The king's room did have cartoons of Americans killing British soldiers during the World War of 1812, and FDR did drink martinis and drive like a maniac. So there's a lot that's correct.
Yeah, I think they were good on the details. Another thing that was not entirely brought out but implicit is apparently, even though they were the American patricians, the Roosevelts, the Roosevelt White House was known for the worst food in the history of mankind. And I'm remembering in my reading of the Hemingway and Martha Gellhorn biographies Martha Gellhorn, Hemingway's third wife, was a close friend of Eleanor Roosevelt. And so they got invited to the White House a couple times, and they both made sure to eat before, because, even though they had chefs and kitchens at their behest, the worst, plainest, worst, stalest food would come out. And so the whole idea of like they're going to have a picnic with hot dogs, even though hot dogs can be delicious, is sort of in character, not beyond the fact that it's Americana.
Well, I think I was going to talk about the poor food at the White House too, and apparently now I don't know if this is true or not. Who knows? But the theory is that Eleanor was punishing FDR by for having this affair with Lucy Mercer Rutherford, in 1922 or whatever it was, and it punished him through his whole life by feeding him like the worst food, because it's not like he liked that food, but he couldn't get her to give him good food.
Well, that's one way to take it out on your husband. My main issue with the history was the lack of it.
Yeah.
As I sort of referenced earlier, I think they didn't really find a nexus between the personal and the historical. And we see more of a blend in some of the other movies we've talked about, certainly Nixon by Oliver Stone, and also Steven Spielberg's Lincoln, where you saw an interplay of the personal family issues and the broader, bigger historical issues. And I just don't think they did a lot of that here.
No, you're right about that. And there were a couple of other small details that, I'm trying to, as we go along here, trying to let myself not be bothered by these historical inaccuracies. But, the media were not at that dinner, right?
Mm-hmm.
There were no photographs of the king eating hot dog. That was all leaked to the New York Times the next morning by, I assume, someone in the White House. And the New York Times splashed this whole big story on the front page of their paper about the king eating a hot dog.
Another thing, Gary, is that the king and queen had already been at the White House.
Yeah.
They'd already had several days of talks and meetings, and they traveled together with the Roosevelts to Hyde Park. So this whole idea of everyone at Hyde Park waiting in suspense for the arrival is a little bit manufactured.
Also, I had to look this up afterwards, but it is not common or expected for an American citizen to curtsy to the Queen and King. I mean, there's a lot of Eleanor, I'm not going to curtsy to her, or well, no, you shouldn't. But like Roosevelt's mother, she like practically hit her forehead on the floor curtsying to the Queen.
Yeah.
Like that. I mean,
well, we didn't when we got visited by the Queen. All we were told was, don't do the American thrusting out of your hand. Wait right for her hand. But we weren't told to bow or anything like that.
Anyway, I mean that's a very small thing, but I didn't quite understand that.
Now on the hot dog helping to forge the special relationship, I have to say that maybe it's true, but it reminded me of the movie Dick. In other words, taking something that really happened and extrapolating something from, he ate a hot dog and therefore we went to war on behalf of the British. It sounds like a Dick-like scenario, doesn't it?
And the other thing that inaccurate is, or implied inaccurate, is that FDR was totally in favor of us getting into the supporting the British. It wasn't like he was coming over here to convince FDR to change policy. It was to figure out a way to advance FDR's plan, hope to get America behind the war, or behind the British if there was going to be a war.
And to figure out a way how to get arms and materiel over there without having to go through Congress. Boy, have presidents figured that out since.
Yeah, they just send it over.
Right.
Now, the other thing I don't want to talk about FDR and Daisy too much more, but I would say that they became friends in 1922 when he was really a kind of a nobody. He was a failed vice presidential candidate at that point, and he was depressed because he had polio and he couldn't walk anymore. Not because in this movie, it's because he has a sinus headache,
Right.
and he was while he's already president. So she rode that friendship all the time from when he was a nobody to when he was governor. She went to the inauguration. Um, she was friends with him throughout the entire presidency. This hilltop thing happened in 1937, which was 2 years before the British, the Royals visited. So, it was a much longer relationship and a deeper one than you see in this movie.
Well, she really was an important figure
Right.
in the Roosevelt presidency. He spoke his last words on earth to her.
Right.
She was down there it was in Georgia, and he was having his portrait painted, and he said to her, "I have a terrific pain in the back of my head," and then he slumped over, and that was it. So that's important. There's only like a small handful of pictures of him in a wheelchair, and she took several of them. She's the reason we have any picture of Roosevelt in a wheelchair, just from historical interest standpoint. And she gave FDR Fala, the presidential dog, which was as famous a dog as Checkers would later become, right?
Maybe even more famous. Yeah. It's funny. There's been two big speeches about presidential dogs. One was Checkers and one was about Fala. I actually looked it up. It gives you a good idea of how manipulative and how he used humor. FDR used humor to get his policies through.
And knew how to work the press.
This so this has nothing to do with the movie. But I'm going to go in, I'm going to do it down this road anyway. FDR actually had to defend his dog in a nationwide speech because the Republicans were accusing him of sending a warship off to pick him up off some island. And this is what he said, which I thought was pretty funny. He said, "These Republican leaders have not been content with attacks on me or my wife or my sons. No, not content with that. They now include my little dog, Fala. Well, of course, I don't resent attacks, and my family doesn't resent attacks, but Fala does resent them. Fala is Scotch, and being a Scottie, as soon as he learned that that Republican fiction writers in Congress had concocted a story that I'd left him behind on an Aleutian island and had sent a destroyer back to find him at a cost to the taxpayers of $2 or $3 or $8 or $20 million, his Scotch soul was furious. He has not been the same dog since. I am accustomed to hearing ridiculous and malicious falsehoods about myself, but I think I have a right to object to libelous statements about my dog."
Of course, the
yeah, I know.
20,
I know. Go ahead.
No, 20 or 30 years from now, it'll probably be stuff uncovered showing it was true.
Well, the reason I know about this is because Fala has a long, long Wikipedia page. So I
longer than Checkers. We ought to compare.
I don't know. We should compare to see if Checkers or Fala has a longer page. All right. What were your favorite scenes?
Well,
you've already hinted at some of these.
Yeah, I think, and this combination of scenes saved the movie for me. It was FDR and the King alone, followed by the King, all happy and proud, pleased with himself, going up to see the Queen, and she totally demolished his good feeling of good spirits.
Yeah.
And so I thought it was dramatic. It was there was pathos in it. I thought when FDR transitioned, he was very patronizing at the beginning of their private conversation, uncomfortably so. I mean, almost brutally so. But then they were able, when the King started stuttering and reading his notes, and he finally, he says, "Damn stutter." And FDR then referenced his own being confined to a wheelchair and say, people won't notice it if you don't let them notice it.
Right.
And I thought that was a touch of humanity and bonding over afflictions that I really appreciated. And it was just a roller coaster ride of moods and emotions from the time they went behind closed doors alone to the time that the king felt he had accomplished what he came for, and then he went up and then sort of got taken down a few pegs by his wife. That was my favorite.
Yeah, I agree with you. That whole sequence, exactly. That whole sequence when they go behind closed doors until they until the next morning when they look out the window and see uh Roosevelt and Daisy and Missy LeHand all having like a fit downstairs. I thought that was ridiculous, but when they were together. The other My other favorite scene was that awkward encounter between the Eleanor and the Queen.
Yeah.
Eleanor shows her to the room and asks if she can call her Elizabeth, and Olivia Colman is like, yeah, of course, yeah, okay.
Never was there more, she said she didn't mind, and never was anyone more unconvincing. The opposite of what she really believed. That was one of my favorite lines, actually.
Okay.
That,
And also the Queen says, well, rightly, tell me everything. And Eleanor is like, she points out the window and says, well, there's a hill and it runs down to the water. And the Queen's like, oh, how fascinating.
yeah, I know.
Oh, imagine
Another one
being...
of my,
Yeah, go ahead.
Another one of mine was, of course, the picnic scene was full of good laughs, and I appreciated the scene because of the Queen's face during the Indian chant, the way again, that's what I meant by her reaction shots. The look on her face when the Indian chant was occurring, and then the look on her face when the hot dog was being presented. That's acting I really appreciated. She made that scene.
In real life, she did eat the hot dog, but she ate it with a knife and fork. Yeah, I thought she was great. I mean, we've kind of talked about our favorite lines. One of my favorite line was exactly when he talks to they talk about their disabilities, and FDR says, no one mentions the fact that I can't use my legs. I used to think it was because they were embarrassed, but now I think it's because it's not what they want to see. And, that's an important lesson in leadership. If you're confident and act confident, don't call attention to things you're insecure about. People will, you bring people along with you.
Right. I liked another one of the Queen's lines said privately to the king shortly after they arrived, and they were up in their room, and she said, I mean, Hyde Park is in London. It's so confusing to me. It's such a great British line, like, how can there be a Hyde Park in America?
That movie was filmed in the UK.
Yes, they recreated it.
Recreated it, yeah. I did notice that the building there they showed in the movie was actually smaller than the real Hyde Park.
Mm-hmm.
The real Hyde Park that Anna Roosevelt owned, and later this Roosevelt, FDR owned, is quite a lot bit bigger. I've been there, and it's a very interesting place to go. It's only about an hour and a half from here, and so we drove up one afternoon and did the tour. It's very big, and the library, they did a very good job of recreating what the library is like, where they have the cocktail hour and all that kind of thing. And
are there graves there? Gravesite there?
I don't know. I don't remember seeing those.
Yeah.
I want to play a little game with you on like who's bigger, whose list is bigger, how many presidential houses and libraries have you been to? I'm pretty sure I can beat you. So
yeah, I'm sure you can. I haven't even been to Hyde Park, and
I know, and you're only about 2 hours away.
Right, exactly. Of course, I've been to the Richard Nixon Library and Birthplace.
Okay.
Been to that one and enjoyed that. Been to the Ronald Reagan one.
We went together.
Mainly because these were in Southern California,
Right.
where I mostly spend my time. And then in years past, I've been to Monticello and I've been to Mount Vernon. That's it.
So I've been to Mount Vernon, Monticello. I've been to the Reagan Library. I've been to the JFK Library in Boston, which is quite good. And I've been to the LBJ Library in Austin, Texas, which is also very good. For us, it brings back a lot of memories of when we were early mid-teens.
Yes. You haven't been to the Nixon Library?
I have not been to the Nixon Library. I haven't been.
It's really interesting.
Yeah, the next time I come visit you out there, maybe we can go.
Yeah. A couple other lines I have.
Wait, are we back to lines? I'm not finished my list yet. Let me do my list. I've walked by Theodore Roosevelt's birthplace in New York City.
Wow, walked by,
yeah. So I'm not really counting that, although I did find out that you can go in now that COVID is over, so I can go in. But I've got two that I bet you, I know that you haven't been to, and that I doubt that even any of our listeners have been to. One is Martin Van Buren's house in Kinderhook, New York.
Somehow I missed that one.
Yeah. And another one, even more obscure, Calvin Coolidge's house in Plymouth, Vermont.
Well, Gary, you beat me by a mile.
Yeah. All right. I win that contest
myself.
Yeah. But it occurred to me the best houses are the ones for the rich, the rich Democrats who become president, like Jefferson, FDR. And then ones we haven't been to, Madison and Monroe have big plantations down south too. So that'd be worth going to sometime. And Jackson has a big house worth going to.
Well, eventually they'll open the Obama Library in Chicago, but it might be too dangerous to go visit it.
Well, that's assuming that the lawsuits over him stealing away all this parkland ever get resolved. All right. What, you had some more lines you wanted to talk?
Just a couple. When the king said, they want to take a picture of me with hot dogs hanging out of my orifices. And sure enough, they did. And then this isn't exactly a line, but there was just a shot of like the local, I think it was the local hardware store after the king and queen had visited.
Oh, yeah.
And it said, the king and queen sat here, and it was supposedly the toilet seat that had been put on especially for the visit and taken off, and it was hung in a storefront window, which only a movie made in Britain could, do something like that to Americans to show the sort of the tacky side.
All right. So what do you think? Is there any relevance or comparison we can make to this movie and to society today and politics today?
Well, I think it is a reminder that even the greatest leaders have private lives, have maybe lives that private lives not everyone would approve of, that they can be in complex relationships. And the only problem with that is once we realize it, we as gossip mongers, meaning you, me, and the American people, want to get into it in incredible detail. And the difference today is we do it contemporaneously with whoever is president at a given time. And so I think it provides an interesting perspective that presidents are real people too, but we can get carried away with all the gossip and the folklore and miss the fact that they're the most powerful people on earth.
Yeah. And I it's a reminder to me of how the 30s, which are not that long ago. I mean, well, I guess 90 years ago.
Maybe for you and me there.
Yeah, exactly. The 30s, let's put it this way, in the lifetime of people we know, the security was so light there. I mean, you'd have one car, a couple of Secret Service agents. They weren't even called Secret Service agents then, I don't think. Protecting the president as he goes out for these drives. And it was, much simpler. And the population still had a lot of respect for the president. But also, I think maybe where the relevance comes in would be in the way it looks at leadership and how a president uses his personality to get what he wants. I think that is, a perennially important question. What does leadership mean? How do you lead? And part of it is just being confident, being charming when you need to be, being forceful when you need to be, being firm when you need to be. And he was a master at that. And you get touches of it, even though a lot of this is all only done backstage in his personal life.
Right. I agree with that.
Could this movie be made today?
Sure, why not? I mean, it's I say that because it's kind of a frivolous movie, frankly. So yeah, I mean, they're making movies about everything, right?
Yeah.
Movies don't have to appear in theaters anymore. You don't have to sell theater owners to run your movie. You just put it on a streaming service. So I would say, sure.
Well, you could make this, you could make this as a Netflix movie or a Peacock movie. And maybe not exactly like this, though, if you think about it. In this Me Too environment, FDR would be considered a sexual predator using his privilege to extract sexual pleasures. So
yeah, yes,
maybe not. I mean, maybe they have a different vibe to it.
On the other hand, if it were made today, it might even be more likely to try to show that people with disabilities can have sexual relationships too, and it might even be more cringeworthy.
Well, it was pretty cringeworthy. I would say, though, you use the word sexual relationship. I don't know about relationship. I mean, if that's all it entailed was sitting in a car and in the front seat, I mean, to have a real sex, you need to get into the back seat, right? So right. I'm told, I've never done it myself, but I know that's, to really get moving around. I mean, sitting in front of a steering wheel is not the best way to have sex.
No, but what I'm saying is that if it were made today, there would actually probably be discussion we'd have to sit through of how, why, when, where, don't assume, et cetera, because of the people with disabilities lobby. We're normal people too.
Right. I would also say we actually didn't talk about his relationships. The more I looked into it, I don't think he had a sexual relationship with Missy LeHand either, or with Daisy. It is proven, it is well acknowledged that this Lucy Mercer Rutherford he had an affair with, and she was actually there with Daisy when FDR died, and
breaking his promise to Eleanor, as he did on numerous,
Eleanor, that he wouldn't see her anymore. Exactly.
And meetings arranged by the daughter.
Yeah,
his daughter.
There's where you could show the sex, because I'm sure that they went into the White House and used the presidential bedrooms and all the rest. Anyway, who would you recommend this movie to?
Well, I think anyone who's interested in presidential folklore, anyone who likes to go beneath the surface of their leadership qualities and their policy positions, and get into some of the how did they really live? What were they really like? I think those kind of people like us, would find the movie worth an hour and a half of their time.
Yeah, and I also think it would be a good movie for a general audience, maybe a date night at home, slightly older audience, maybe not as old as us, but looking for something interesting, fun, challenging, but not too challenging. I mean, it's not a challenging movie at all, and I'm sure that's why they threw all this romance stuff in, because it does
Spices things up.
it spices things up, exactly. If you were a high school teacher, would you assign this movie?
No, there's nothing particularly educational about the leadership he exhibited in Depression and in war. It's not particularly enlightening, even though it has funny moments and it has moving moments, but there's sort of a so what that comes after that.
And I think the high school kids would be embarrassed by this sex scene too. I mean, or at least they would be like, ooh, you know. And also there's so much smoking.
Right.
I will say that I think the way that movie makers use smoking to evoke the past is a little overdone now. I mean, all right, we know they smoked, but it's really pervasive in these movies.
Well, the other thing that from a historical standpoint is it's pretty clear what we know now, that both FDR and the king met early deaths.
Oh, right.
Due in large part to their just refusing to ever quit smoking, no matter what their health situation was.
Right. Right.
And the king was in his 50s and when he died, and FDR was 63.
All right. What would you give this movie for a grade?
I'd give it a B-, and only that because it earned that grade because of the scenes with the king and FDR privately, that sequence of scenes. Otherwise, it would have a gentleman's C.
Okay. I would actually give it a B. I guess I liked it slightly more than you did, but I mean, it's certainly not an A. All right. Well, I think we've done this movie to death, and I need to go do some more research on presidential mistresses. Anyway, I would just want to say again that this podcast is available on Apple, Spotify, Amazon, and most podcast platforms. So please go and subscribe there so you don't miss any of our podcasts here. If you have any comments, we have a Facebook page called The Celluloid President, or you can email me at garyholmes76@gmail or Twitter at Gary Holmes. Any final words, Jim?
No, stay tuned for the next installment of The Celluloid President.
President Roosevelt counters a Republican accusation at a presidential campaign meeting.
These Republican leaders have not been content with attacks on me, or on my wife, or on my sons. No, not content with that. They now include my little dog, Fallon. Well, of course, I don't resent attacks, and my family don't resent attacks. But Fallon does resent attacks. You know, Fallon's Scotch. And being a Scottie, as soon as he learned that the Republican fiction writers in Congress and out had concocted a story that I'd left him behind on an Aleutian island and had sent a destroyer back to find him at a cost to the taxpayers of $2 or $3 or $8 or $20 million, his Scotch soul was furious. I think I have a right to resent, to object to libelous statements about my dog.